You did everything you were told, and you are still behind. Carl Jung looks at this ache and refuses to call it failure. He calls it incubation. The late bloomer's comeback he describes is coming for everyone, even those who look years ahead of you. You watched everyone move through their milestones on schedule, while something in you refused. You buried the suspicion that you were built wrong. By the end of this, you will understand exactly why you stalled. You will see why the careers that drained you and the rooms that suffocated you were never your weakness. You will learn the name Jung gave to the long fog, and why he walked through it himself at 38. You will understand the reversal waiting at the center of every life, the hour when the rules that built you quietly stop working, and you will see the strangest truth of all. The descent that broke you early is already on its way to everyone who skipped it. The only question was ever whether it finds you at 25 or at 50. This is why the late bloomer's comeback is coming for all of us. We will trace this in order. First, why you were taught to read your own delay as a defect. Then, what your body was actually doing every time your plans collapsed. And finally, the one reversal Jung saw at the center of every human life, the reason no one, not even the people ahead of you, gets to skip what you have already lived through. Start with the lie you absorbed before you could question it. Think of the last time you opened a screen and watched someone your age announce an arrival, a title, a house, a finished thing. Something dropped in your chest, fast and physical, before a single thought had formed, a quiet arithmetic of how far behind the number says you are. That sensation is older than the screen. It is the social clock, and you have been checking yourself against it your whole life. Our culture turned timing into a verdict on your worth. The child who reads first is gifted. The graduate who lands the title first is brilliant. The one who marries, buys, and settles on schedule is mature. Speed became the proof. And so the person whose path stalls, drifts, or simply takes longer learns to carry a quiet shame, as though slowness were a moral failing rather than a different rate of growth. Jung spends his life unknotting this exact confusion. He sees that the modern world mistakes outer adaptation for inner development, and the two are not the same animal. Outer adaptation is the work of the morning of life. It is the building of a persona, a workable face you assemble to meet what your parents, your teachers, and your employers expect of you. It is necessary. A young life has to learn to function in the collective, to win a place, to hold a shape. But the persona is a compromise, a negotiated surface between who you are and what the world will reward. It is not your face. And when the building goes too smoothly, when the mask fits early and fits well, a particular danger opens. You forget it is a mask. You mistake the role for the person wearing it. The one whose adaptation never quite takes, whose persona keeps slipping no matter how hard they press it into place, carries something the early achiever does not. Their inner development is running on a slower, deeper clock, one that refuses to trade wholeness for speed. What the social clock reads as falling behind is the psyche declining to build a house it would only have to abandon. But the reason the psyche refuses is stranger than simple slowness, and it is not gentle. Consider a man. Call him 62. He spent his whole working life a half step behind the people around him, in jobs that paid the bills and never felt like his, always telling himself the real life would begin once he finally caught up. He never caught up. And now, with the obvious markers of arriving further away than they have ever been, something in him has gone quiet and immovable, a low refusal he cannot reason with, as if the part of him that was supposed to keep striving had set down its tools and walked off the job. He did not have a word for it, so he reached for the ones available. Failure, laziness, a life half wasted. He assumed something in him had broken long ago and never healed, and that the quiet was the sound of it finally giving out. You may know this from the inside. You build momentum and something quietly dismantles it. The role you were supposed to want curdles. The relationship that looked right on paper goes hollow in the body. A low chronic exhaustion settles in and makes the mornings impossible. And you call it self-sabotage, as though there were a saboteur in you working against your own good. Jung offers a colder and kinder reading. He watches what happens when the conscious self, the ego, tries to live a life that does not belong to it. The deeper psyche, the larger totality he calls the self, does not stay quiet. The self has no interest in your standing, your title, or how the timeline judges you. Its single concern is your wholeness. And when you spend your strength holding together a life that violates that wholeness, the self begins, in its own slow way, to withdraw its consent. That is what the quiet is. That is the baffling loss of interest in the work that used to define you. The way the body declines a room where you are performing a self you do not feel. The conscious mind reads it as malfunction. Underneath, something far more accurate is happening. The self is on strike. What looks like surrender is a withdrawal of consent. The part of him that was never consulted, the part that signed none of these arrangements, has stopped paying for them. The striving lasted as long as it did because he forced it to. It is going quiet now because the cost of forcing it has finally outrun what he has left. You have called this your weakness for most of your life. It was the one thing in you that would not lie. But surviving the false life initiates you into something the world has no comfortable name for, a season of total disorientation. So the persona falls, and a gray fog rushes in to fill the space where the self used to stand. To the outside world, the one in this passage looks lost. They are 30 or 40 or 62, and they can no longer answer the simplest question a stranger asks at a gathering. What do you do? They know with painful precision what they do not want, and they cannot see anywhere ahead what they do. This is the loneliest stretch of the road, and the temptation to betray yourself for the sake of stability becomes almost unbearable. You watch the others collect promotions and mortgages and certainty, and you begin to wonder whether your insistence on a life that fit was just a child's fantasy you should have outgrown. Jung sees this stretch clearly, because the old traditions he spent his life studying had mapped it long before psychology owned a word for it. The shape you built has to come apart before anything truer can take its place. The conscious mind reads the coming apart as pure destruction. The deeper psyche is quietly using it as material. And most accounts of Jung leave out the part that matters. He lived every step of this himself. He went down into it. In 1913, after his break with Freud severed him from the movement that had been his professional home, Jung came apart. He was 38. He had everything the morning of life is supposed to deliver. International standing as a psychiatrist, a wealthy marriage, a fine house on the lake, students, authority. And his own persona collapsed beneath him. He was assailed by visions he could not control, by the fear that he was losing his mind. For years he pulled back from public professional life. He sat with the images that came to him. He wrote them down in the books that would become the Red Book. And in one of the strangest passages he ever recorded, this internationally respected man went down to the edge of the lake and began building a little town out of stones, like a child, because it was the only way back to the imagination he had lost. By every external measure, he had become a late bloomer who had thrown his career into the water. By the only measure that mattered, he was incubating the work the rest of his life would be built on. And the age matters. 38 is no coincidence. It is the quiet hinge this whole video turns on, because the collapse that meets the late bloomer early is the same turning point that waits, on schedule, for everyone at the center of life. You believe these are the empty years, the proof that you fell behind and never recovered. They are the years doing the work that makes everything after them possible. The fog you are sitting in is doing the oldest work there is. It is the dark soil, and nothing has ever grown in the light alone. Yet the thing the fog grows in you is not a thing the world knows how to praise. When you come up out of the fog, you find you have changed in a way that costs you socially. You have developed an allergy. You can no longer sit easily in small talk. You cannot stay in the meeting where everyone is performing a sincerity no one feels. Words you do not mean catch in your throat, and saying them merely to be polite now produces a physical pressure, a tightness, a faint nausea, as though your body were rejecting a food it used to tolerate. The people around you notice. They tell you that you have gotten difficult or distant or too serious. You begin to fear that the fog left you bitter. But bitterness is the wrong name for it. What grew in the dark is something Jung treats with great seriousness, a differentiated feeling function. In Jung's typology, feeling is a way of knowing rather than a wave of mood, a quiet faculty that appraises whether the thing in front of you is true or hollow, and does it before you can talk yourself into or out of anything. While you were busy building a life, yours stayed blunt, easy to override whenever something was convenient enough to want. Yours was forced to grow sharp because in the fog your survival depended on telling the real from the counterfeit. You had nothing else to navigate by. So now it runs all the time, and it will not switch off for the sake of a pleasant evening. The reason you cannot tolerate the hollow is that you have learned at considerable expense exactly where the hollow leads. You spent years there. You know it is the place your life quietly goes to die. The man we are following discovers this when he tries to step back into the old world. He returns to the familiar rooms, the old conversations, the easy version of himself everyone preferred, and he finds he physically cannot perform it anymore. The smile will not hold. The agreeable sentence dies in his mouth. What looks to the people around him like a man turning strange is a man who can no longer lie with his face. You thought the problem was that you had become too sensitive to function. The truth runs closer to the opposite. You became too accurate to pretend. But sensitivity on its own is a wound, not yet a power. Turning it into something you can stand on requires a change at the very center of who decides. The comeback begins underground, long before any title or sum of money, in a shift of authority no one around you can see. For the whole morning of life, the ego faces outward and asks a single question in 100 forms. What do I have to do to be accepted? Which performance buys me safety? Which version of me will they keep? The late bloomer is someone who spent decades failing to find an answer that held because every answer required a self they could not sustain. Then somewhere low in the descent, the question changes. You stop asking what the collective wants from you. You begin to ask, what is yours to do? That sounds small. It is the turn the entire journey was for. Jung is precise about what is happening here. The ego, he insists, is only the center of your conscious awareness, one complex among many, a single lit room in a house far larger and mostly dark. It is not the whole of you, though for most of a life it believes it owns the house outright. The descent is what teaches it otherwise, and on the far side the ego takes a humbler and truer place. It stops being the master and becomes the conscious partner of the larger totality, the self, that was quietly running the deeper decisions all along. This is the ground of what we might call self-possession, and it has little to do with confidence. Confidence is built on what you have done, on achievements and the approval they bought, and it rises and falls with the next result. Self-possession rests on something the results cannot touch. It is the sober knowledge of who you actually are, scars and limits and unfinished places included, held without apology. The man with the compass feels this arrive on an ordinary afternoon. Nothing in his circumstances has changed. He still cannot say what he does for a living. But the frantic checking against everyone else has gone quiet, and in its place is a strange, level steadiness, as though some inner needle that spun for 30 years had finally found the one direction it was always seeking: himself. If you have ever felt that quiet turn, even once, leave it here in a single line. Type the words, "I stopped asking permission to exist," in the comments where the others still stalled in the fog can find it, and know they are not alone in the dark. And it is here, at the lowest point of the isolation, that the largest reversal in a human life finally shows its face. This is the reversal everything has been pointing toward. Jung maps a whole human life as the arc of the sun across a single day. The morning is the climb. The sun rises, widens its reach, gathers strength, fixes its boundaries, learns to function in the world. This is the work of the persona and the expanding ego, and it is the right work for the first half of life. We are supposed to build, to win a place, to become someone the world can recognize, but the sun does not climb forever. Somewhere around the middle of life, often in the mid-30s to the 40s, it reaches the top of its arc, the noon of life. And at that exact point, something inexorable turns. The sun must begin to descend, and the rules that govern the morning quietly expire. Jung saw that the very energies that built the first half must now reverse their direction. The outward drive, the ambition, the conquest, the will to expand has to make room for its opposite, the inward turn, the integration of the shadow, the acceptance of limit, the search for meaning rather than position. He gave this reversal a name, enantiodromia, the law by which any one-sided state, pushed far enough, flips into its contrary. The harder you ran toward the light, the more total the turn into the dark when noon arrives. And this is the answer to the question the opening left hanging. This is why the late bloomer's comeback is coming for everyone. The early achievers simply postponed the descent. They won the morning so cleanly, the persona fit so well, the milestones fell so neatly into place that they never had to question the house they were building. They skipped the fog, they never met their shadow, they lived almost entirely through the role. So the bill arrives later, and it arrives all at once. We have a tidy phrase for the moment it lands. The midlife crisis. The sudden affair, the abandoned career, the promotion that arrives and lands like a verdict instead of a reward, the success that goes hollow the week it is finally won. The world calls it a weakness of character. Underneath, it is the self, having waited politely for decades, forcing the descent that was deferred. It is the night sea journey arriving on a delay. Sit with what this means for the timeline that has shamed you. Set the two of them side by side. The early achiever was climbing in the sunlight while the late bloomer was already going down into the dark. The late bloomer was initiated first. They went down in their 20s or their 30s, so that by the time everyone reaches the afternoon, when the old rules expire for all of us, the late bloomer is already holding the one instrument the afternoon requires. They have been there, they know the way down, and they learned it when it nearly killed them. You were handed the journey early when it could still remake you. Everyone else got the comfortable version, the one that comes due later. But arriving on the far side of this looks nothing like the triumph you were promised. When the late bloomer finally steps into their own, it is quiet. There is no triumphant return, no montage, no crowd. The arrival is measured inward, almost unremarkable from the outside. You do not catch up to life. Life catches up to you. The years in the fog stop registering as waste and begin registering as foundation. The sensitivity that looked for so long like a defect is now the most reliable instrument you own. And the hunger for the crowd's approval, the thing that drove the whole exhausting morning, has been quietly burned out of the system. By the time recognition arrives, if it arrives at all, you no longer need it to tell you who you are. You already know. You paid for the knowing. This is what Jung means by individuation, and he is careful to guard it from a fantasy the mind keeps reaching for, the dream of becoming finally flawless. Individuation aims instead at wholeness, a larger and stranger thing, because wholeness has to include the very parts that perfection would throw away. Your delays, your failures, the decade that went nowhere, the grief for the life you did not live. Wholeness folds all of it in and lets the damage become part of the actual shape of a person, carried in the open. Jung is clear that this shape is yours alone, that no single map of a life will fit another, that the path which saves one person would strangle the next. The shoe that fits one foot cripples another. There is no recipe for living that serves every case, which means the very thing that isolated you, the refusal to walk the standard road, was individuation itself, beginning in you long before you had a word for it. The man with the compass becomes no one new. He announces no grand second act to quiet the relatives who worried. He simply stops defending his timeline to anyone, stops explaining the lost years. He carries them now the way the oak carries its scars, as the record of the storms that made the canopy possible. And people begin, without quite knowing why, to feel steadier near him. Authenticity does that. It is the rarest stabilizing force there is, and you cannot fake it into being. You spent your life believing you would have to earn the right to stop apologizing. There is nothing to earn. One ordinary day, you simply stop. But the path keeps one last trap in reserve, and it is the most flattering and the most dangerous of them all. This is the trap the path will hide from you because it wears the face of your healing. The same descent that made you real can counterfeit itself. When you come up out of the hard years with your new depth and your sharpened discernment, the ego does something cleverer than surrender. It adapts. It reaches for the language of your transformation and begins to build a new mask out of it, one far more flattering than the old. It wants to call you awakened, chosen, marked out by what you survived. Jung has a precise warning for this. He calls it inflation, the point where a person stops carrying a thing and starts being carried away by it, identifying with the depth until the ego wears it like a borrowed greatness, what he called the mana personality. For you, the bait is exact. It is the pull to make your delay into a verdict, to look at the ones still climbing in the sunlight and decide they are merely asleep, to turn your longer timeline into a quiet throne. Do that, and the descent has taught you nothing. You have only built a grander version of the mask you lost. Real individuation moves the other way. It makes you plain, ordinary, reachable, the opposite of the mask you were tempted to build. The loneliness that comes with this path, the knowing of things you cannot hand to anyone else, is a cost carried quietly, without pride and without resentment, and never a crown to wear. The man with the compass understands this at the end. His wisdom is the kind that needs no audience. He can sit at a window in the middle of an ordinary afternoon, hold the tension between the small self that still wants applause and the larger self that needs none, and let a whole hour pass with nothing to show for it and no need to account for it to anyone. That is the whole of it. He went all the way down and came back real, and nothing grander than that was ever needed. So if you have spent your life feeling behind, hold this as you go. What looked like a broken path was a root, growing in the dark, on a deeper clock than the one that shamed you, doing the slow work nothing above the ground can see. The morning of life was not yours to win. The afternoon is yours to inhabit, and you come to it already knowing the way down. If even part of this names something you have carried alone, leave one line below, different from the first. Type the words, "My timeline runs deeper than theirs," where the next person sitting in the fog will read it and understand they were never broken, only early. The descent you survived was the initiation, and the one coming for everyone else is the next thing we will follow down. Stay with the root that works in the dark.
Empaths aren't broken. They're alchemists in progress. The Alchemist's Path gives you drills, Jung-based boundaries, and 3 exclusive chapter videos to turn overwhelm into clarity. By Surreal Mind, 236-page downloadable ebook in stock. Begin now at thesurrealmind.com.